Hello, and welcome back, LGL 130 students, to parts 4 and 5 of our human rights lecture. This will be the final substantive lecture before exam time, and you should get a review, but the exam is, we're still in the process of creating it, and figuring it all out. So dates have been assigned, and you can find those at another source, but for now, I just wanted to finish the remaining portion of the slides. This shouldn't be too long. I'm hoping to keep it to 20 minutes. Okay, and let's go. So when we're dealing with discrimination, and we have talked about, and if you want to go back and review the slides, the video of yesterday, by all means do so. But you should by this point have sort of, after reading the chapter 13, and just reviewing the slides, you have a sense of sort of the Constitution, the Charter, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and what the Human Rights Code of Ontario is. So it's remedial legislation designed to serve a purpose, and that purpose is to prevent people like you and me from being discriminated against on the basis of an enumerated category. So yeah. It is a, the Human Rights Code goes part and parcel with a couple of other entities. The Human Rights Tribunal is sort of a form that, it's a tribunal, as it says, administrative tribunal, which deals with litigation in a matter relating to the Human Rights Code. It is a civil form. So very often you're dealing with damages there. The Human Rights Commission has sort of a different purpose as well. Yeah, sorry about that. I just wanted to pull the statute up in front of me here. So the Human Rights Code is the statute, okay, and it's Human Rights Code RSO, Revised Statute of Ontario, 1990, and it has within it, just looking at sort of the elements. Part 1, freedom from discrimination. Part 2, interpretation and application of the code itself. Part 3, the Human Rights Commission, the Ontario Human Rights Commission. And within that statute, looks at sort of the commission itself, commission policies, search warrants. I'll leave it to you to review that. Part 4 is the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario as it is a tribunal. And you'll deal more with that when you deal with administrative law. But basically, that is sort of, that's it. So part 4, really just going to talk a little bit about discrimination and sort of, some select instances where it might be acceptable. So let's talk first and foremost about direct discrimination. Looking at slide 15, direct discrimination is, we don't rent, this apartment building to people like you and X, and, didn't want to include anything there specifically. Indirect discrimination, when, you don't rent, units of the building to people like X, and then constructive discrimination, and that's sort of like, it's a little trickier, when someone will say, we don't discriminate, but you have to be able to do, a certain thing, just like everyone else. And so we know in certain situations where there are instances where people just cannot, there needs to be some accommodation, let's say. So that's sort of what we'll get into a little bit further, and then we'll talk about the bona fide occupational requirements and what exactly that means. So I included in slides 16 and 17 some case law for you just to have a sense of sort of what the courts have said about this. So this is from the Superior Court, the Ontario Human Rights Commission, and Etobicoke, the city, from 1982. And this just talks a little bit about the bona fide occupational requirement, but it'll sort of give you a sense of discrimination generally. So basically, to be a bona fide from Etobicoke, to be a bona fide occupational qualification and requirement, limitations such as a mandatory retirement at a fixed age must be imposed honestly and in good faith, and in the sincerely held belief that such limitation is imposed in the interest of the adequate performance of the work involved with all reasonable dispatch, safety, and economy, and not for ulterior or extraneous reasons aimed at objectives which could defeat the purpose of the code. So, that's sort of it. It's got to be, this is the background, honesty, good faith, sincerely held belief that such a limitation is imposed in the interest of the inadequate performance of the work involved with all reasonable dispatch, safety, and economy. Okay, so that just sort of gives you a sense of what has to come behind it. Look at Central Alberta Dairy Pool and Alberta from 1991 at the Supreme Court. An employer with a large number of employees of many different religions may be able to discharge the duty inherent of a BF, bona fide occupational requirement, by adopting a policy with respect to the accommodation of the religious beliefs of its employees. Such a policy may be a reasonable alternative to a practice that entails an ad hoc accommodation of individual employees. An employer that has not adopted a policy with respect to accommodation and cannot otherwise satisfy the trier fact that individual accommodation would result in undue hardship will be required to justify her conduct with respect to the individual complainant. So in this sort of situation, there is, such a policy may be a reasonable alternative to a practice that entails an ad hoc accommodation. So you can set these policies out, to accommodate individuals with sincerely held religious beliefs, and if it's not adopted a policy with respect to the accommodation, and they haven't gone beyond the concept of undue hardship, then there will be trouble to follow. So in 1999, a case from British Columbia against the union sort of solved the issue of what is a bona fide occupational requirement. Okay, and so in this case, it set out a three-part test to determine if a rule of qualification has a negative effect on a protected group and if it's discriminatory. So what happened here was that M was a female firefighter, and she was the government of British Columbia set sort of a new standard with regard to firefighting qualifications. Now we all want our firefighters to be in good shape, and you know me, I walk with a cane, I have a physical disability which is very obvious. I know that I would not make a good firefighter or police officer for that matter. Or anything really, any job that has sort of, requires me to run. I haven't been able to run in over 20 odd years. But so but in this sort of situation, the candidate was just coming in under the wire. I think like you had to do a certain amount you had to run a certain distance in a certain amount of time, and she came in under just I think about 45 or so seconds. 45 seconds. Below the required standard. So it wasn't sort of, she didn't reach the standard, but it wasn't sort of extraordinarily bad. It wasn't sort of a totally, like for example, if I had to do that, I would take my sweet old time, and getting up a building in 4 minutes would probably take me half an hour. So I very clearly would not meet the standard. So what happened is that the Supreme Court was called upon to decide what constitutes a bona fide occupational requirement. And the first category was the rule, and just straight from the slides here, was the rule or requirement adopted for the purpose rationally connected to the performance of the job. Okay, so rationally connected to the performance of the job. 2, was it adopted in an honest belief that it was necessary to satisfy a legitimate business purpose? And 3, was it reasonably necessary to accomplish that purpose. So, and if the rule or requirement meets this test, it is considered to be a bona fide occupational requirement, and the employer must show that it is impossible to accommodate the individual without undue hardship. And undue hardship is, sort of a legal test, a legal term, concept that we would use, and it's basically it has to be considerably difficult to accommodate the individual. Like, it's a very high bar to meet, as it maybe it should be. So so that's sort of just what is a bona fide occupational requirement. And if you have any questions about that, you can give me an email, but text is fairly straightforward on that, and there's lots more of this coming in future courses. So I just moving now to part 5, and I look now we're 10 minutes, so we're making great time today. But and what I've done here is for the remaining portion of the chapter is I've just sort of offered to you a how do we balance human rights. This is sort of for you to finish the chapter, but also think about this. We are in a pluralistic, diverse city, province, and country. And sort of, just when you're reading the textbook about the various cases, looking at how we balance rights, religious rights, religious freedoms versus, sexual rights, same-sex rights. Many religious institutions, in their doctrine and, say that certain activities are wrong, but, in a pluralistic society, how do we reconcile that? Same-sex marriage being an obvious example, because of course you can't get married in many religious houses of worship on account of the doctrines that those religions follow. And the next question, of course, has a hierarchy of rights developed in Canada? And in a free society, how do we deal with difficult topics like hate speech? Where do we draw the line? Because that line will be, very different for people. And just, consider what are the future of human rights in Canada and Ontario. So, unfortunately, this lecture doesn't really, this part of the lecture is very speculative, and so I don't really want to go into that on camera right now. If you have any questions about that, by all means, please email them to me. I'm happy to entertain those, and if I get enough questions, I will do a sort of maybe a little lecture on that. But really, I will leave it there for now and just give you the questions for next week, and I'll probably do those. Probably on Friday. I'm still trying to figure out how to make this all work in the comfort of my own condo here, but anyway, it's going okay, and I hope you're doing well too. So on page 358 and 359, the questions for next week. And hey, look at it, we're at 13 minutes in a little bit. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I thank you again for your attention, and good luck, and have a great day. Thank you.